July 17th, 2025. A faint point of light flickered just above the shoulder of Mars. Nothing special, just another quiet traveler crossing the dark. But when you stack the last 9 nights of telescope data, something strange emerges. The dot doesn't move like a comet. It pivots, almost as if it's aware it's being watched. And then comes the part that freezes every control room on Earth. At 0241 UTC, radio observatories in Chile, South Africa, and Australia register the same pulse, 1/10 of a second long, repeating every 6 minutes. Not noise, not a satellite ping, a clean harmonic sequence that looks engineered. NASA hasn't said a word. The European Space Agency postponed their briefing twice, citing data verification. Harvard's Avi Loeb called it the most intriguing outlier since the wow signal. His phrasing, outlier, was deliberate. Here's what shouldn't be possible. The object's heat signature is uneven, as if one side is generating energy. Its reflectivity, 20 times higher than rock or ice, makes it shine like polished alloy. And the timing of that signal, 6 minutes apart, lands exactly when the object crosses Earth's prime observation arc. In less than 5 days, it will slip behind the sun, invisible for months. What happens when it comes back out? If you find this as unsettling as I do, hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, what time it is there, and whether you think we're finally hearing something the universe never meant for us to hear. Share this episode on X, Reddit, or wherever you find the curious awake at midnight, because the silence that follows might be the loudest sound we've ever recorded. Chapter 1. The Release That Broke the Internet. October 3rd, 2025. If you were awake that night, you remember the chaos. The European Space Agency dropped a press release at 2 a.m. UTC, first confirmed optical imagery of interstellar object 3I Atlas. Within minutes, every corner of the internet ignited. Hashtags, live streams, think pieces, conspiracy channels. The phrase alien probe trended before dawn. The images themselves? A disappointment wrapped in mystery, blurry, overexposed frames showing a glowing core drifting past a dim star field. No tail, no dust, no familiar cometary bloom. Just a smooth, reflective body moving with mechanical precision. At first, no one could tell why the world's most advanced cameras had delivered such low-grade footage. Billions in funding, 7 orbiters aligned for this moment, and what we got looked like a child's flashlight caught on long exposure. Within hours, amateur astronomers began uploading their own captures. Backyard telescopes, improvised tracking rigs, stacked exposures built from hundreds of frames. Some of those images were sharper, unnervingly so. The object's surface wasn't uniform at all. Faint linear ridges crossed its midsection like seams. Others detected an oscillation in brightness repeating every 42 seconds, too consistent to be random. And then came the breakdowns, the digital autopsies, Reddit threads stacked with spectral analyses, AI-enhanced reconstructions, pixel-by-pixel comparisons. The conclusion spreading through the forums wasn't subtle. This thing looks engineered. When you zoom into the contrast layer, the reflections arrange themselves into regular geometry, triangular clusters, equidistant flares. The official explanation said, sensor bloom. But that excuse collapsed when multiple instruments from different agencies, different countries, produced the same anomalies. NASA remained silent. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, perfectly positioned for high-resolution imaging, suddenly went off schedule. Its live feed paused mid-transmission. The status page vanished from the agency's public database. A routine maintenance window, they called it. Right. By dawn, social media was ablaze. A viral post from a user named Deep Sky Archive compared ESA's image to an amateur capture of Comet Lemon, taken with a handheld mirrorless camera. The caption read, "If a $500 setup can do this, what's NASA hiding with billions?" 40,000 reposts in 12 hours. What followed was predictable but revealing. The agencies issued half-statements, phrases like data calibration issues and optical overexposure due to Mars albedo. In plainer words, our cameras were too bright. Yet every independent astrophotographer knew that excuse didn't hold. Exposure settings are public. Every mission log is time-stamped. Someone would have noticed an error that obvious before transmission. It felt like a pressure release valve. Throw the public a fuzzy picture. Let them argue about noise while the real data stays locked away. Because here's the part few noticed. The release timestamp, 2 a.m. UTC, aligned perfectly with the moment the object entered solar conjunction, the narrow window when direct observation from Earth becomes impossible. The drop wasn't random. It was a farewell, a curtain call. That timing started a pattern we'd see again and again. Information appearing only when verification became impossible. A strategy of plausible deniability dressed as transparency. And behind the noise, a smaller question whispered through late-night streams and private Discord channels. Why release anything at all if they knew it would collapse under scrutiny? Maybe the answer is simpler than we want to believe. Maybe they needed us looking in the wrong direction, because somewhere inside those low-resolution frames, beneath the static and overexposure, a glint repeats. A clean specular flash, exactly once per rotation. A code in plain sight. The release that broke the internet wasn't about showing us what they'd found. It was about teaching us how to look. Chapter 2. The Missing Data. October 8th, 2025. 5 days after the ESA's fuzzy images flooded the web, a strange quiet settled over every major observatory feed. NASA's data stream from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, one of the most consistent, unbroken telemetry sources in existence, went dark at precisely 1900 hours Eastern Time. No warning, no countdown, just silence. The explanation arrived hours later. Government shutdown. 15,000 employees furloughed, over 80% of NASA's workforce sent home indefinitely. But here's what didn't add up. ESA is a European agency. China's Tianwen-1 and the UAE's Hope Orbiter are sovereign missions. They operate outside American politics. Yet, by dawn the next day, their data portals displayed the same status message. Temporarily unavailable due to technical maintenance. Maintenance? On 3 separate networks, across 3 continents, at the exact same time. The odds of that are astronomical. Journalists tried filing Freedom of Information Act requests. The responses came back weeks later, pages so heavily redacted they might as well have been blank. Lines blacked out from edge to edge. The few visible words, National Security Directive and temporary data containment, only deepened the paranoia. Since when did a comet require national security clearance? Inside the astronomy community, a different kind of shutdown began. Researchers who had spent decades studying comet behavior suddenly found themselves locked out of shared databases. Collaborators stopped replying to emails. Scheduled public talks were postponed indefinitely. It felt orchestrated, coordinated, like someone had flipped a global switch labeled Containment Protocol. But containment of what? I reached out to an astrophysicist I've known for years. No name here for obvious reasons. He confirmed that the Webb Space Telescope's spectroscopic data set on Atlas had been flagged restricted. Restricted doesn't mean classified. It means something worse, indefinite administrative review. In practice, that's a bureaucratic deep freeze. The data exists, but no one outside a handful of senior analysts is permitted to see it. He also mentioned a line in the internal communication thread that made him pause. Heat anomaly exceeds permissible variance. Recommends suppression pending reevaluation. Suppression. It wasn't about calibration or formatting errors. It was about content. Around the same time, several independent astronomers began noticing something odd in their telescope control software. Whenever they entered Atlas's coordinates, their systems returned a no object found warning. That's impossible. The coordinates are fixed, the orbital data public. The only way for that error to appear is if the catalog entry itself has been removed from the database. Someone had rewritten the sky. Within 24 hours, online observatories, sites that rely on those same catalogs, began showing blank fields where Atlas should have been. No trace, no metadata, nothing. A clean erasure. This is when the theories fractured. Some said human error. Others whispered about deliberate obfuscation. But a small subset of researchers noticed a deeper pattern. The blackout aligned perfectly with the object's transit behind the sun. Think about that. Every time Atlas became impossible to observe directly, the public data vanished. When it reappeared, the records returned. Edited, truncated, missing timestamps. Coincidence? Maybe once, not 3 times in a row. And then came the leak. A screenshot posted on a small private astronomy forum, allegedly from within ESA's secure server. The file name read Web Infrared Atlas Temp Anomaly PNG. The image showed a thermal map, one side of the object glowing at 80 Kelvin above baseline, the other near absolute zero. The post stayed online for less than 10 minutes before moderators deleted it. But the internet never forgets. Analysts compared it to standard comet thermography. The conclusion was simple. No natural rotation or surface composition could sustain that level of asymmetry. One hemisphere was active, generating energy, the other, inert. That leak triggered chaos. ESA denied the file's authenticity. NASA called it a fabrication. But the metadata embedded in the image told a different story. Timestamped October 5, 2025. Verified instrument ID from the James Webb's Mid-Infrared Instrument Array. And then, another blackout. Webb's live observation schedule disappeared from its public site. The social media accounts of key personnel went inactive. Within hours, amateur astronomers who tried to track Atlas reported unusual interference, local radio noise spiking every 6 minutes, as if the object were still transmitting. You start to see the pattern, don't you? Every time the evidence grows undeniable, the silence thickens. Every time something inexplicable happens, access collapses. The data isn't missing. It's being hidden in plain sight. Because silence, intentional, measured silence, is a message too. And in this case, it's saying something loud. They don't want us to know what Atlas really is. Chapter 3, The Amateur Evidence, October 10th, 2025. When the official data vanished, the amateur stepped in. That's the funny thing about astronomy. It's one of the few sciences where you can challenge institutions with nothing more than patience, a clear sky, and a good mirror. Within 48 hours of the blackout, a loose alliance of backyard observers began forming online. They called themselves the Open Sky Project. No funding, no hierarchy, just a shared belief that the truth was still visible if you knew where to look. Their first breakthrough came from a small town outside Lisbon. An astrophotographer known online as Dobsonian Power posted a stacked image series of Atlas captured through a solar telescope, an instrument never meant for this kind of work. Yet what appeared on his feed defied explanation, a faint, angular silhouette buried inside the comet's glow. It wasn't symmetrical, but it was structured. He wrote only 6 words beneath the image. What on earth is it? The post went viral. Forums lit up. Within hours, users began enhancing the photo. Contrast filters, AI denoising, pattern reconstruction. Some images revealed linear features that looked suspiciously like framework. Others showed reflective panels, segmented evenly, like plating on an engineered surface. Most dismissed it as digital noise, a glitch amplified by aggressive processing, but a few details refused to vanish no matter how the image was reprocessed. Lines stayed straight. Angles stayed exact. Professional astronomers immediately attacked the credibility. Solar telescopes, they said, aren't designed for faint deep space targets. Their filters distort brightness and create artifacts. That explanation satisfied the media for a few days, until a group of students at Kyoto University replicated the capture using entirely different equipment. They used a modest reflecting telescope with narrow-band filters and obtained nearly identical geometry. 2 independent systems, 2 hemispheres of the planet, 1 repeating structure. And then came the spectrum. A retired engineer from Argentina, running an old radio spectrometer from his garage, recorded a peculiar emission at 21 centimeters, the same wavelength used by SETI to listen for hydrogen line communication. The signal lasted less than 2 minutes, but repeated every 6. Sound familiar? He sent his raw data to an open-source analysis hub, where hundreds of volunteers began dissecting it. The pattern was too clean to dismiss as noise. a narrow-band carrier wave modulated by faint sidebands, almost rhythmic. When someone plotted it against the original "wow" signal from 1977, the overlap was eerie. Not identical, but similar enough to raise eyebrows among those who remembered the history. Meanwhile, image anomalies kept piling up. A French astrophotographer discovered subtle polarization effects inconsistent with natural dust reflection. A team in New Zealand detected rotational brightness curves that implied deliberate orientation. None of them could fully agree on what they were seeing, but they agreed on what they weren't seeing: a random rock. Online debates grew vicious. On one side, the believers, convinced Atlas was some kind of probe, an artificial construct observing us as we observed it. On the other, the debunkers, armed with physics textbooks and an unshakable faith in statistical probability. They argued that every anomaly could be explained by poor calibration, atmospheric distortion, or confirmation bias. The human brain loves patterns, they said. We see faces in clouds, spacecraft in noise. But even skeptics hesitated when a third group entered the conversation: data scientists. They began analyzing light curve variations using machine learning. When they fed Atlas's photometric data into models trained to recognize tumbling comets, the algorithms failed catastrophically. Then they trained a new model using patterns from satellites, objects with stable rotation and controlled orientation. That model fit perfectly. At that point, the narrative began to shift. Even the loudest skeptics started using different language. Not artifact, but anomaly. Not illusion, but unexplained signature. It's fascinating how vocabulary reveals belief before belief reveals itself. I spoke to one of those data scientists, a quiet guy from Vancouver who preferred anonymity. He told me something that's haunted me ever since. When we plotted the luminosity cycles against Earth's rotation, the peaks aligned when North America had the object in direct line of sight. When the planet turned away, the peaks flattened. It's almost like it was syncing with us. Syncing. The word lingered in my head long after the call ended. Because synchronization implies awareness. Awareness implies intention, and intention changes everything. By the second week of October, the Open Sky Project published its findings in a sprawling PDF shared across encrypted drives. It contained timestamps, cross-checked coordinates, emission charts, and raw images, all publicly verifiable. Nothing hidden, nothing redacted. The document's final line read, "If official institutions refuse to observe, we will observe for them." Within a day, that statement reached major news outlets. Within 2, it disappeared from search results. Somewhere between public curiosity and official silence, the evidence was buried again. But the amateurs had already proven their point. No matter how tightly information is controlled, the sky remains public domain. And if Atlas truly wanted to stay hidden, it had chosen the wrong planet to fly past. Chapter 4. The Leak. October 12th, 2025. The first rule of classified information is that it always leaks. Maybe not to the front page of a newspaper, maybe not in a way that's obvious, but truth has a strange persistence. It seeps through cracks, encoded in the language of the people who aren't supposed to talk. At 2:46 a.m., a post appeared on 4chan's paranormal board under the ID Issei Intern. The thread title was plain: Infrared Data on 3i Atlas. Something's wrong. Inside were 3 sentences. I am a doctoral researcher at the European Space Agency working on combined infrared analysis of the object known as 3i Atlas. The internal thermal gradient is impossible. The material response curve doesn't exist in our databases. Then came a string of attached files, 7 images, each a screen grab of what appeared to be spectrographic plots and infrared overlays. Before moderators could delete the post, it spread across Twitter, Reddit, and encrypted archives. By dawn, every serious astronomer and conspiracy theorist on the planet had seen it. What made this leak different wasn't the data, it was the specificity. The plots referenced real calibration codes from the Webb Space Telescope's mid-infrared instrument, identifiers that could only have come from someone inside. And those graphs showed something that should be physically impossible. Normal comets release volatile gases as they near the sun: water vapor, carbon dioxide, trace organics. Their infrared profiles form gentle peaks corresponding to temperature zones. Atlas's profile wasn't gentle. It looked engineered. Sharp steps, precise intervals of heat emission, like power cycles. Imagine the thermal heartbeat of a machine. By the time European morning came, ESA had issued a statement calling the leak a fabrication using stolen instrument data. They promised an internal review, denied any anomalies, and reminded the public that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But an hour later, a second leak hit, this time from Pastebin, a text dump titled ESA Internal Meeting Notes, October 9th. The notes detailed an internal briefing at the ESTEC facility in the Netherlands, where a systems engineer reported persistent non-random modulations within reflected infrared spectrum, frequency stable to 6 decimal places. Frequency stability at that precision isn't thermal noise, it's deliberate emission. The meeting minutes ended with a directive in bold: cease public communication regarding Atlas thermal readings until further notice. Redirect all external queries to centralized communications under the Joint Task Group. Joint Task Group. Not ESA. Not NASA. Something hybrid. Something off books. That phrase triggered a frenzy among researchers. Journalists began connecting dots, cross-referencing government procurement logs, communication satellites, military contracts. Within hours, someone found a reference buried deep in an EU tender database. Project Atlas 3I Coordination, External Data Suppression Framework. The funding source? Not ESA, not NASA. The Department of Defense. At this point, every major news outlet smelled blood. CNN ran a segment asking if classified space coordination was hiding information about a potential interstellar visitor. The ESA held another press conference to calm the public, but the more they denied, the louder the speculation grew. And then, out of nowhere, the source returned. Same anonymous ID, same board. This time, only one sentence. The signal isn't external, it's being amplified. That cryptic message sent analysts scrambling. Amplified by what? Within hours, radio astronomers worldwide noticed something peculiar: faint harmonic resonance around the 21-centimeter hydrogen line, the same band where the earlier transmission had been detected. Only this time, the signal wasn't coming from deep space. It was reflecting, echoing off something between Earth and Mars. In the leaked spectrographic data, those reflections formed a triangular pattern, 3 peaks, perfectly timed, separated by 6-minute intervals, the same pattern seen in the original pulse. But now, one of those peaks lagged by half a second, a sign the source was closer, not farther. If you map that delay, triangulate it against Earth's rotation and orbital motion, you get a position roughly consistent with the Mars-Earth relay corridor, the zone where both agencies maintain active communication satellites. In other words, the signal wasn't coming from Atlas, it was bouncing through something else. Some theorized that Atlas had deployed reflective material, thin metallic filaments like a passive relay. Others suspected a more alarming possibility: that an existing satellite network was being hijacked, co-opted to boost the transmission. Whatever the mechanism, the pattern was unmistakable. Atlas wasn't just emitting, it was interacting. The following morning, a French newspaper received an unmarked USB drive mailed from Brussels. The envelope bore no return address, only a printed line. For those still listening, inside the drive was a single audio file, an upshifted, compressed segment of the recorded signal. When slowed down and converted into the audible spectrum, it resembled a heartbeat followed by a short, rising tone. 3 pulses, pause, repeat. Physicists dismissed it as pareidolia, but musicians recognized something else. The interval between tones corresponded to a perfect fifth, the most fundamental harmonic in all of music. That night, a trending post on X put it bluntly: the universe is humming in perfect pitch, and we're pretending it's static. By the end of the week, the original leak had been erased from nearly every platform. Search results redirected to fact-check pages labeling the data as false. But the timestamps remained. The archives remained. And so did the sound, a steady, methodical rhythm pulsing through space like a metronome for the end of certainty. They called it the October signal. And those of us who stayed up late enough to hear it know one thing for sure. Whatever Atlas is, it's no longer silent. Chapter 5. The Disturbing Calculation. October 15th, 2025. Numbers have a way of stripping mystery bare. They don't care about emotion or faith, they just exist, precise and merciless. But sometimes the math tells a story that no one wants to believe. The first red flag came from a researcher at Caltech who ran trajectory simulations for Atlas after the October signal. He wanted to see if the faint acceleration detected weeks earlier could be explained by typical comet outgassing, jets of sublimating ice pushing the body slightly off course. It's a standard test, the kind of work graduate students do at 3 a.m. with too much coffee and too little supervision. Except this time, the numbers didn't fit. The velocity shifts were subtle, fractions of a meter per second, but they were happening at precise intervals, every 6 minutes and 1 second. The same cadence as the signal. The pattern was so clean it broke the simulation code. The software wasn't designed for objects that corrected themselves. He checked his timestamps, recalibrated the data, ran it again. Same result. Every time the pulse occurred, Atlas adjusted, microscopic course corrections amounting to 1 part in a billion of its velocity vector. Insignificant individually, but cumulative over days. By the end of the observation window, the deviation was measurable. Atlas had shifted 300 kilometers off its projected path. The researcher sent his findings to colleagues at JPL. Within hours, his access to the orbital dataset was revoked. His internal email bounced back with the message, "User credentials inactive." He wasn't fired. He was erased. But not before he shared his data privately with others in the network. Within 2 days, multiple labs replicated the result using independent instruments. The timing of the microbursts was unmistakable. Atlas wasn't drifting, it was steering. And that's when the real panic started. Because the direction of those course corrections wasn't random, it was toward Earth's line of sight. Not an impact trajectory, not a collision course, just alignment, as though it wanted to stay visible. The math was merciless. If you plotted the velocity deltas against the rotation of our planet, the acceleration peaks matched our prime observation windows, periods when the object was most clearly observable from ground-based telescopes in the northern hemisphere. When we were watching, it moved. When we weren't, it coasted. That's not physics. That's choreography. Some physicists tried to salvage a natural explanation. They proposed rotational heating, solar radiation asymmetry, even electromagnetic drag. But those forces don't turn on and off in 6-minute bursts timed to human observation schedules. A quiet message began circulating through encrypted astrophysics servers. We were meant to see it. Think about that for a second. Not accidental discovery, not cosmic coincidence, intentional visibility. It's the difference between stumbling across a footprint and realizing the footprint was placed where you'd find it. The media never got hold of the full calculation, but fragments leaked. Someone at Harvard's Center for Astrophysics published an uncredited PDF under the pseudonym Lyra Protocol. It contained 3 graphs, pulse frequency versus acceleration, energy output versus rotation phase, and a final haunting plot, trajectory deviation versus Earth visibility. The slope of that last line was near perfect correlation. Correlation isn't causation, they'll tell you. But this wasn't weather or social science. This was orbital mechanics, one of the few domains where coincidence has almost no room to hide. That document included one final note, written in plain English at the bottom of the page. If the acceleration pattern continues beyond October 29th, Atlas will reposition itself into Earth-Sun resonance, not impact trajectory, observation corridor. In other words, it's preparing to park in a place where we can't not see it. Meanwhile, independent analysts began re-examining older data from Oumuamua and Borisov. the previous two interstellar visitors. To everyone's astonishment, faint periodic accelerations were visible in their telemetry too, buried beneath measurement noise. Not as precise as Atlas's, but there all the same. 3 objects, 3 patterns, each more deliberate than the last. You could dismiss 1 as coincidence, 2 as anomaly, but 3? That's design. By the end of October's second week, the data chatter was boiling. A leaked email thread from an internal NASA channel surfaced briefly before deletion. One line stood out: "If this pattern holds, visibility synchronization is intentional. Recommend immediate classification under Cosmic Surveillance Directive." That phrase, cosmic surveillance, started trending almost instantly. Podcasts, YouTube channels, late-night talk shows. Everyone speculated what it meant. Some said it referred to an interagency monitoring project. Others claimed it was code for reverse-engineered intelligence tracking. But among scientists, a darker hypothesis circulated privately. If Atlas was performing visibility corrections, it wasn't just showing itself. It was mapping responses. They theorized that every time our instruments pinged it with radar, every time our telescopes measured its light, Atlas responded in kind. Each signal we sent was being answered. A feedback loop. An interaction. And that's when I understood something that still keeps me awake at night. What if the signal wasn't a call at all? What if it was an echo? A way of teaching us the pattern of communication? I called my contact at JPL again. He sounded exhausted. He said one line before hanging up: "They're not tracking it anymore. It's tracking us." For a long time, I stared at my screen, watching the orbit diagram drift in real time. Each pulse, each micro-adjustment, unfolding like a heartbeat on a cosmic monitor. We used to think the universe was indifferent, a vast silence broken only by accident. Now, for the first time, the numbers whispered otherwise. Atlas wasn't just moving through space. It was listening, and perhaps adjusting its aim. Chapter 6. The Historical Echo. October 18th, 2025. When you dig deep enough into cosmic history, you start seeing the same fingerprints repeated across time, events that don't just rhyme, they mirror. And in the case of 3I Atlas, the pattern reaches back almost half a century. It starts in August 1977, at the Big Ear Radio Telescope in Ohio. A volunteer researcher named Jerry Eamon circles a line of numbers on a printout and writes one word in the margin: "Wow." The signal lasted 72 seconds, narrowband, strong, stable. It never repeated. It came from the constellation Sagittarius, right at the edge of the hydrogen line, the same frequency where hydrogen atoms whisper across the universe. For decades, astronomers debated whether it was extraterrestrial or just terrestrial interference. They could never replicate it. Fast forward 48 years. 3I Atlas enters our system, trailing a pulse on the same frequency, separated by 6-minute intervals instead of 72 seconds. The ratio, 5:1, lines up perfectly with the difference in our signal processing windows between analog and digital systems. A coincidence so mathematically elegant that even the skeptics grew quiet. Dr. Avi Loeb, always cautious but curious, noted the resemblance during an off-record discussion caught on a hot mic during a Cambridge symposium. "If this thing is genuine," he said, "then perhaps we've been in conversation longer than we realize. Only we forgot how to listen." That quote never made it into official transcripts, but the audio circulated among graduate students like contraband scripture. Then the next echo appeared, Oumuamua, 2017. The first confirmed interstellar object. The anomaly everyone remembers for its bizarre acceleration, pancake shape, and lack of a visible tail. Most dismissed it as a shard of rock, an exotic fragment shaped by forces we didn't yet understand. But buried inside old telemetry from the Spitzer Space Telescope was something overlooked until now. A faint modulation in infrared intensity occurring every 72 seconds. Sound familiar? Same period as the "wow" signal. The modulation had been dismissed as data compression artifact. No one bothered to double-check until the Atlas data forced them to. When analysts reran the old code with updated noise filters, the pattern re-emerged, clear as day. 3 objects, 3 epochs, 3 harmonics. Borisov, 2019, the second interstellar visitor, showed the same frequency divided by 12. It was as if each arrival tuned itself to match our instruments of the era. 70s, analog radio. 2000s, infrared arrays. Now, hybrid quantum interferometers. The realization was simple but terrifying. Whatever these objects are, they're calibrating, adapting. A memo leaked from ESA's SETI liaison office summed it up in one sentence. The signals are iterative handshakes, optimized for evolving human detection thresholds. In plain language, it's talking to us in whatever language we're technologically capable of hearing. When that document surfaced, governments panicked, because buried in the same memo was a timeline projection. 3 arrivals, each roughly 2 years apart at first, then a 6-year gap, and now, by statistical regression, the next could come within 18 months after Atlas departs. 4 objects, 4 messages, 4 acts of a communication protocol unfolding across human generations. The idea hit the scientific community like a virus. Podcasts, panels, late-night debates. People argued over whether the pattern meant coordination or coincidence. But beneath the noise, a smaller question grew teeth. What if these aren't probes at all? What if they're breadcrumbs, markers placed along a route we're only now tracing backward? There's precedent for this kind of reasoning in astrophysics. Pulsars were once called LGM-1, little green men, because their regular pulses looked artificial. Now we know they're neutron stars. Maybe these interstellar objects are natural too. Rare fragments behaving strangely because we've never seen enough of them to understand the rules. That's the comfort theory. The one scientists tell themselves when they can't sleep. But the echoes refuse to fade. In 1997, a Deep Space Network receiver in Canberra logged a brief carrier tone identical in frequency to the wow signal, but shifted by precisely the Doppler factor corresponding to an object leaving our solar system at Oumuamua's speed. The data was filed, ignored, and forgotten. After the Atlas transmission, that same archive was reopened. The match was perfect. You start to realize the timeline forms a kind of heartbeat. 77, 97, 17, 25. Every 20 years, another beat, another echo, like a countdown or a test of consistency. Historians of science will tell you progress isn't linear. It moves in waves of curiosity and silence. But this pattern feels too deliberate to be cultural. It's cosmic. It's as though something out there has been tapping on the glass every 2 decades, waiting to see if we finally look up. In the weeks after the leak, a few quiet voices within the astrophysics community began to speak more freely. One of them, a radio astronomer from Bologna, said this to me over a scrambled call. We think the first signal was the introduction. The second was acknowledgement. The third is instruction. Instruction. That word stuck with me. Because if the sequence follows linguistic logic, introduction, acknowledgement, instruction, then the next might be demonstration. And maybe that's what 3i Atlas is preparing for. The way it aligns itself with our observation windows, the deliberate acceleration, the persistence of the 6-minute pulse. It all feels like preparation for a reveal. But what kind of reveal requires half a century of patience? Maybe it isn't patience at all. Patience. Maybe time doesn't mean to them what it means to us. If these are artifacts of a civilization that measures in eons instead of minutes, then we're just catching a glimpse of a conversation already well underway. When I play the recordings from the October signal side by side with the cleaned version of the wow signal, a strange resonance emerges, a harmonic interference pattern that builds and collapses like 2 instruments tuning to each other. And every time the waveforms intersect, I feel it in my chest. It's faint, but it's there, a whisper from 1977 echoing into 2025. Maybe we were never alone. Maybe we just weren't synchronized yet. Chapter 7. The Statistical Impossibility. October 21st, 2025. Every field of science has a breaking point, a threshold where coincidence becomes conspiracy, where math stops offering comfort and starts whispering that something else is at play. For astrophysics, that moment arrived the night Dr. Ilya Voronin finished his model. Voronin wasn't a fringe theorist. He worked for the European Southern Observatory, a data specialist known for his brutal skepticism. If a hypothesis had even a whiff of mysticism, he'd tear it apart with precision. But in October, he ran a probability model linking the known interstellar visitors, Oumuamua, Borisov, and now 3I Atlas, and the result made him physically ill. The odds of 3 interstellar objects entering the solar system within a single decade, following the observed parameters of trajectory, reflectivity, and compositional anomaly, were 1 in 10 to the 23rd. That's roughly equivalent to flipping a coin and having it land on its edge 50 times in a row. Impossible. And yet, it happened. At first, Voronin assumed his code was faulty. He rewrote it from scratch, using NASA's own orbital data, then switched to JPL's datasets. Same result. Same. He simplified the inputs, adjusted for bias, removed velocity outliers. Same result. 1 in 10 to the 23rd. He wrote to colleagues in Cambridge and Tokyo. They verified his code. They couldn't debunk it. The next morning, his model disappeared from the public repository. His account was suspended, pending administrative review. By evening, an internal memo circulated within the European Space Agency, instructing all affiliated researchers to refrain from statistical extrapolations that may invite public misinterpretation. Translation: stop running the numbers. But by then it was too late. Voronin had already shared his results with an independent consortium of astrophysicists who were investigating the same anomaly under a different name, the Atlas Correlation Group. They weren't amateurs or conspiracy theorists. They were professionals working quietly inside academia, people who understood how to hide in plain sight. The group's central premise was simple. If multiple independent interstellar visitors share more than 2 coincident variables, they should not be treated as random. And in this case, there were 7. 1. Trajectory inclination. Each object entered within 10 degrees of the ecliptic plane. 2. Velocity distribution. Each slowed slightly as it approached the inner system, then accelerated, leaving. 3. Spectral composition. Each displayed anomalous metal ratios, nickel dominant, iron deficient. 4. Reflectivity. Each object exhibited mirror-like surfaces inconsistent with natural cometary albedo. 5. Rotation stability. Each rotated with near-mechanical precision. 6. Thermal asymmetry. Each had one hemisphere generating excess heat. 7. Signal correlation. Each coincided with a measurable radio frequency emission near the hydrogen line. When you put all 7 variables into a probabilistic matrix, you don't get coincidence. You get coordination. That word, coordination, spread like contagion. By the following week, anonymous posts from observatory staff appeared on closed forums describing data recalls and compliance audits. Datasets were being wiped clean, replaced with newly verified versions lacking timestamp anomalies. Some scientists were quietly reassigned, others pressured into silence. Then came the statistical leak. Someone uploaded Voronin's raw model to a torrent under the title, The Atlas Equation. Within hours, physicists across the world downloaded it. The model wasn't complicated. It could run on a laptop. People began testing it themselves, inserting real observation data from public records. The numbers held up every time. Soon, the conversation shifted from if to why. A documentary crew in New York interviewed Voronin through a scrambled voice filter. His words were hesitant but clear. When probability collapses like this, it usually means we're missing a variable. Something is guiding the randomness. That phrase hit me like a brick, guiding the randomness, because that's what every piece of evidence pointed toward. A pattern woven into chaos, an invisible hand steering cosmic dice rolls toward meaning. But not everyone agreed. Some scientists claimed observer bias, arguing that human pattern recognition was to blame. We were desperate to assign order to noise. But that argument failed when AI systems, trained to detect non-random clustering, reached the same conclusion. One open-source AI, running on data from the Hubble and Webb archives, returned a chilling result. Probability of non-random coordination between 1I Oumuamua, 2I Borisov, and 3I Atlas, 99.99998%. That figure should have triggered global headlines. Instead, it triggered deletions. Within hours, the AI's GitHub page vanished, its API keys revoked, the developer's account suspended for violation of terms of service. Meanwhile, deeper inside the Atlas correlation group, a smaller subteam was working on something even more unsettling, a spatial overlay of all three trajectories. When plotted over a heliocentric grid, their paths intersected near a single coordinate in the outer solar system, a point roughly 30 astronomical units beyond Neptune, deep within the Kuiper belt. The intersection formed a perfect equilateral triangle. At first, the geometry seemed poetic, but meaningless. Space is vast, coincidences happen. But when they extended the triangle's lines outward, the apex aligned almost exactly with Earth's position during each detection window. 3 arrivals, 3 points, 1 observer. The pattern was too precise to dismiss. By midnight, the file containing the spatial overlay had been quietly renamed the Trinity Map. I managed to obtain a copy from a source who'd been part of the project before it was shut down. The image is simple: a dark background, 3 glowing arcs converging toward a single bright dot labeled Origin Unresolved. When I asked him what that meant, he said something I'll never forget. It means they're not coming from random directions. They're coming from a fixed origin, and that origin knows exactly where we are. The following morning, several members of the Atlas Correlation Group were placed on indefinite administrative leave. Their institutional email addresses stopped working. One of them, Dr. Voronin, hasn't been seen publicly since. The press, of course, never picked it up. By then, public attention had shifted to the government shutdown and a new election cycle. The world moved on. But inside observatories, behind encrypted servers, and across countless private chats, the math remained, unyielding, undeniable, impossible. 3 cosmic visitors, 7 shared anomalies, 1 triangulated origin, and a probability so small it might as well spell intent. Because at some point, even scientists have to admit what the numbers are saying. Coincidence has an expiration date. Chapter 8. The Control Room. October 25th, 2025. If you've ever stood inside a mission operations center, you know the hum. That low, constant vibration that lives somewhere between the machines and your own heartbeat. It's not sound so much as presence, the feeling that the room itself is alive. I hadn't been inside one in years, not since my brief stint covering the Mars Polar Lander relaunch. But this wasn't NASA or ESA or any place you could find on an organizational chart. They called it Facility K9, buried beneath an unmarked building in Northern Virginia. No signage, no press releases, just security protocols that made airports look casual. My contact, a systems engineer who owed me more than one favor, slipped me in under the guise of a maintenance subcontractor. He said one thing before we entered: "Don't talk, don't touch anything, and if someone asks who you are, you're a contractor from Raytheon working on air filtration." Inside, it looked like any other control center. Dark walls, glowing consoles, operators with headsets speaking in clipped language. But the displays, they weren't monitoring rockets or satellites. Every screen showed variations of the same object, 3I Atlas, rendered in dozens of wavelengths, its orbit annotated with streams of data that pulsed in real time. The central display carried a simple header: Atlas Monitoring and Response Node, Classified Cosmic Surveillance Directive. There it was again, the phrase from the leaked NASA memo. Only now it had a logo, a black triangle enclosing 3 concentric circles. I kept my mouth shut and pretended to check a power conduit while my contact whispered the rundown. This isn't about observation anymore. It's about containment. They're not studying it. They're trying to predict when it looks back. He pointed to a side panel where a feed labeled Thermal Vector Analysis flickered with false color imagery. It showed Atlas in infrared, its surface cycling through temperature shifts that pulsed like respiration. One side blazed with sustained heat, around 300 Kelvin, while the opposite hemisphere remained near absolute zero. The gradient wasn't random. It followed a smooth wave traveling longitudinally across its surface. "That's not natural," he said. "It's distributing energy internally, like it's regulating its own temperature. The pattern's recursive, same shape every 6 minutes. 6 minutes again, the signature frequency." At that moment, one of the analysts leaned toward his console. "Telemetry spike, Sector 3. Confirmed phase shift." On the main display, the image zoomed into a segment of Atlas's illuminated hemisphere. A faint ripple moved across it, a heat wave tracing geometric paths, like current running through circuitry. The entire room tensed. A voice from the back asked, "What's the orientation relative to Earth?" "Direct alignment," the analyst replied. The supervisor frowned. "Initiate echo damp protocol." The term was unfamiliar to me, but the effect was immediate. Banks of equipment along the wall powered up, emitting a faint electrical hiss. The display's brightness dropped. My contact leaned close. "They're jamming, trying to reduce reflection feedback in the hydrogen band." The theory, he explained later, was that Atlas's transmissions weren't just outbound, they were reactive. Every time Earth-based observatories pinged it with radar or collected photometric data, it responded, sending back a distorted mirror of whatever signal it received. The facility's job wasn't to monitor, it was to control the conversation, to filter what left and what came back. For years, scientists had wondered whether the object was communicating intentionally. Inside Facility K9, they weren't wondering anymore. They were managing it. On another console, a line of text scrolled, "M response detected. Harmonic lock achieved. Signal return. 1.2's delay." The supervisor nodded slowly. "Stable loop. Maintain isolation." That phrase, "stable loop," haunted me, because it implied reciprocity, a rhythm, a dialogue. We were locked into a pattern of transmission we didn't fully control. While I pretended to fix a ventilation panel, I watched another monitor showing the object's rotation map. Every 6 minutes it adjusted slightly. Micro-rotations measured in arc seconds. When mapped over time, the rotations traced a consistent shape. Not random, a glyph. Later, my contact sent me a snapshot captured from the data buffer before it was scrubbed. When I ran it through an image filter, the shape resolved into something chillingly familiar. 3 interlocking rings, intersecting in perfect symmetry, the same symbol from the Cosmic Surveillance Directive logo. By midnight, an alert tone cut through the room. Signal amplitude rising, thermal flux up 15%. Someone swore under their breath. Is it responding again? Unclear. Origin vector approaching synchronous alignment. The supervisor turned to the team. "All right, lock it down. Full blackout mode." The lights dimmed. Screens switched to standby. My contact nudged me toward the exit. "We need to go, now." Outside, under the cold Virginia sky, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest since the moment we entered. "What are they afraid of?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "They think it's building something inside. That the hollow readings aren't cavities, they're chambers. We're not watching a rock, we're watching a machine that's waking up." He looked at me with tired eyes. "And when it's fully awake, it'll know exactly who's been watching." That night, as I drove away from Facility K9, the radio crackled for a split second. A faint pulse, 3 beats, pause, repeat. The same tone we'd heard in the October signal. I pulled over on the empty highway and listened. 6 minutes later, it came again. Somewhere out there, beyond the orbit of Mars, something was answering. Chapter 9. The Revelation. October 29th, 2025. There are moments when discovery doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like trespass. Like stepping across a line you didn't know existed, only to realize something on the other side has been waiting for you all along. That morning began with a simple anomaly. The Deep Space Network in Canberra reported a persistent broadband interference across the hydrogen line, strong enough to saturate their receivers but localized to one direction, the same coordinates as 3i Atlas. It wasn't a random burst or a steady tone. It was structured, layered. The first decoding attempts treated it as a message, binary sequences, phase modulation, classic SETI protocol, but nothing matched known linguistic or mathematical templates. Then someone had the idea to run the data through a biological filter, mapping signal density to DNA codons. What emerged wasn't text, it was architecture, a pattern of repeating triplets forming symmetrical helix structures, a digital mirror of the genetic code for carbon-based life. For a moment, the entire analysis team thought it was coincidence, a pareidolic accident of data compression. But when they cross-checked the spectrograms, they found something impossible. The modulation depth of the signal precisely matched the noise profile of human genome sequences stored in public databases. Atlas had just transmitted the molecular blueprint of life on Earth. By noon, every secure channel within NASA and ESA was buzzing. The internal label for the signal changed from anomaly to revelation. I saw the header myself, forwarded by a nervous contact who couldn't sleep after reading it. It said simply, Atlas transmission, genomic analog, detected, protocol mirror, initiated mirror. That word again. At 1312 UTC, 3 separate observatories, Haleakala, Paranal, and Alma, reported a simultaneous spike in visible light reflectivity from Atlas's surface. The brightness doubled in less than 60 seconds. Then the object stopped rotating. Comets don't stop rotating, but Atlas did. It locked orientation directly toward Earth. Within minutes, the object began to emit a new signal, low frequency, slow amplitude modulation, as if compressing data into long-wave pulses. Every 6 minutes, one burst. When researchers mapped the intervals, they discovered each pulse contained harmonic frequencies corresponding to Earth's ionospheric resonances, the Schumann frequencies that govern our planet's electromagnetic heartbeat. Atlas wasn't just transmitting, it was synchronizing. At that moment, the feed from the Webb Space Telescope cut out. The official explanation was instrument recalibration. But within private channels, engineers reported something stranger. The telescope's attitude control system began drifting without command input, slowly aligning its mirror array toward the same coordinates as Atlas. It was as if the instrument itself were being guided. Inside Facility K9, my contact told me later, all monitoring systems switched to lockdown. The protocol shifted, he said. They weren't jamming anymore. They were listening. That night, a secure teleconference connected NASA, ESA, and the Pentagon. Someone leaked a portion of the transcript. The fragment read, "The data packet contains recursive encoding. Each layer reveals another when analyzed using the previous one as a key. Recursive self-decryption? Exactly. It's teaching us how to read it." The concept was staggering, a signal that adapts to the intelligence decoding it, unfolding more information as comprehension increases, like an exam graded in real time. Hours later, the pattern revealed its next layer. When the pulses were arranged spatially instead of temporally, mapped not as time but as three-dimensional vectors, they formed a lattice structure. Within that lattice were voids arranged in symmetrical spacing. One researcher overlaid the geometry onto the internal density readings from Atlas. The match was perfect. The signal was a schematic. Atlas had sent us a model of its own interior. According to the layout, the hollow chambers weren't empty. They contained clusters, regions that emitted distinct electromagnetic fields, each resonating with harmonic multiples of Earth's magnetic frequency. In essence, Atlas was broadcasting the signature of our planet from within itself. Why? Some believed it was an identification system, a way of saying we recognize you. Others thought it was something far more intimate, a mirror not of our planet, but of us, a copy. The next breakthrough came from a linguist working with signal analysts at MIT. She noticed that when the modulation pattern was slowed by a factor of 3 and mapped into audio range, the waveform produced alternating tones corresponding to the human heartbeat rhythm, lub-dub, pause, lub-dub. Every sixth pulse contained a subtle distortion matching the electrical potential of neural firing patterns. The signal wasn't just imitating biology, it was imitating consciousness. Then came the visual data. ESA's solar orbiter captured an image sequence of Atlas's illuminated hemisphere. Embedded within the reflected light was a spectral fluctuation, variations in brightness that, when stitched together, formed moving interference bands. Someone applied a Fourier transform to those bands and discovered they encoded a two-dimensional image. Grainy, distorted, but recognizable. It was an image of Earth, not as a globe or a map, but as a series of infrared outlines, highlighting population centers, electromagnetic emissions, and heat signatures. The same type of mapping we perform on exoplanets when searching for biosignatures. Except this time, we were the subject. Atlas was observing us the same way we observed the universe. Through spectroscopy, through reflection, through inference. The realization landed like a punch. For decades, we pointed telescopes outward, hoping for a response to our radio beacons. Now the answer had arrived, not as a greeting, but as a reflection. A cosmic mirror turned toward its observer. I called my contact again. He didn't answer at first. When he finally did, his voice was low. They ran a final analysis on the transmission. And the last layer contains coordinates, not for space, for time. What do you mean? It's predicting its own trajectory past the sun, down to the millisecond. And on January 3rd, 2026, he paused. It will align directly between Earth and the sun for exactly 6 minutes. 6 minutes, the heartbeat of the signal. He said they were calling it the mirror window. For the first time in history, something from beyond our solar neighborhood wasn't just passing through. It was positioning itself for symmetry, alignment, reflection. I asked him what the agencies planned to do. He hesitated. They're not planning anything. They're waiting, because maybe that's what it's been testing all along. Not our technology, not our defenses, but our patience. As the call ended, I looked out the window toward the night sky. Somewhere beyond Mars, a smooth, metallic body hung in silence, rotating slowly toward perfect balance. The world below it buzzed with theories and denial, but none of it mattered. Because for the first time, we weren't searching for meaning in the stars. The stars were searching for meaning in us. And maybe, just maybe, they'd found it. Chapter 10, The Final Silence, January 3rd, 2026. For 6 minutes the universe held its breath. It began just after dawn over the Pacific. Atlas crossed the face of the sun, an interstellar object perfectly aligned between our star and our planet. The alignment wasn't coincidence. It happened exactly when the signal's recursive coordinates had predicted, down to the millisecond. For observers on Earth, it appeared as a faint, moving silhouette, too small to eclipse the sun, but large enough to register as a dark line sliding across the solar disk. Telescopes from Chile to Hawaii to Japan locked on. NASA called it a transit event. The media called it the moment. But inside every control room, there was a different word being whispered: synchronization. At first, nothing unusual happened. No new signals, no unexpected flares, just the quiet geometry of an object passing in front of our star. But then, exactly 3 minutes into the transit, every radio telescope tuned to the hydrogen band detected the same pattern simultaneously. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 more. The same cadence we'd heard in October. Except this time, the amplitude was amplified 1,000-fold. The power surge knocked out receivers across continents. Arrays shut down automatically to protect themselves. For 12 seconds, our planet hummed with resonance. The same Schumann frequencies Atlas had been transmitting, now echoed back to us by our own ionosphere. Every instrument we possessed registered interference. Every magnetic compass in the northern hemisphere drifted 3 degrees east. For those who were outside, reports described a subtle vibration in the air, like standing next to an enormous subwoofer tuned below the range of hearing. And then, as abruptly as it began, the pulse stopped. What remained wasn't noise. It was absence, a kind of quiet that wasn't natural. The Deep Space Network logged 0 returns, no radar reflection, no thermal echo. Atlas was gone. At first, scientists assumed it had simply passed behind the sun, temporarily occluded. But when it should have re-emerged, nothing appeared. Telescopes scanned every trajectory vector. Empty space. The object that had defied every expectation, every physical law we understood, had vanished without trace. Governments issued calm statements. NASA held a press conference emphasizing that the event posed no danger to Earth. ESA released a single paragraph calling the disappearance consistent with non-gravitational perturbations. The words felt hollow, rehearsed. Inside Facility K9, my contact told me what the official briefings never did. The signal hadn't stopped. It had gone silent by choice. The last pulse contained a checksum, a self-terminating code. When decoded, it translated into one simple phrase repeated across every frequency band. Mirror complete. No one knew what that meant. Some called it closure, others warning. 2 weeks later, the Webb telescope regained full function. When engineers analyzed its onboard logs, they found something impossible. The last frame before Atlas vanished showed a faint reflection in the solar corona, not of the object itself, but of Earth. A perfect spectroscopic imprint of our planet's entire electromagnetic signature recorded at the moment of alignment. Our global heartbeat, captured and sent somewhere we couldn't follow. After that, silence. For the next months, the sky returned to normal. Astronomers shifted back to routine surveys. The public, restless for answers, turned to politics, entertainment, the comforting static of everyday life. But among scientists, a quiet dread lingered. Because when the raw radio data from that final day was reprocessed months later using updated algorithms, a faint residual pattern appeared beneath the static. Not a signal, a reflection of one. It was the echo of our own transmissions. Radar pings, television broadcasts, deep space probes, all returning faintly distorted, phase-shifted by fractions of a second, as if they'd bounced off something beyond the sun. Something that had been listening. The phenomenon persisted for exactly 6 days. Then the echoes faded, one by one, leaving behind nothing but cosmic background noise. We called it the final silence. But silence, I've learned, isn't empty. It's full of waiting. I asked my contact what happened to Facility K9. He said it was dismantled, its equipment redistributed to unrelated projects. The records sealed. The personnel reassigned under non-disclosure orders. Officially, it never existed. And yet, when I checked the Deep Space Network logs last week, I found a small anomaly, one line buried deep in the system archive. Hydrogen band echo detected. Delay, 6 minutes. Source, unknown. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just the universe breathing. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the radio static flattens into that familiar hiss, I listen for the rhythm buried beneath it. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 more. A heartbeat in the dark. A reminder that somewhere, something learned to see itself through us. The final silence wasn't an ending. It was a hand lifted from glass. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for us to knock back.